This is Joanna Lilley. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Since its inception in 1949, Mental Health Awareness Month has been a cornerstone in addressing the challenges faced by millions of Americans living with mental health conditions. Although this month of recognition has been in existence for a while, stigmatization around mental health still exists. Throughout the month of May, we are bringing you episodes from the parent perspective to highlight this special month. Welcome to the Parent Series, brought to you by Success is Subjective.
It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Kicking off this parent series is Deane, whose son's freshman year at college was derailed by mounting anxiety and depression. Their 2.5-year treatment journey included 2 stays in a wilderness program as well as 2 residential programs. Deane read a book or 2 during this time and might have something to say that would be of value to you. Let's jump right in. Here's Deane. Deane, thanks again for being a guest on the parent series of the Success is Subjective podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me. And if you're okay with it, let's just jump right in. And why don't you give us a little bit of a backstory on kind of what was going on with your child prior to them entering into the treatment experience?
Sure. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk about this and answer any questions. My son, Robert, had a very long history of migraines. It was something that his mom has and her family has, and so we treated that as a medical problem with lots of advocacy, medications, services for school. But he would miss a lot of school because of migraines. And despite all of that medical treatment, the amount of time that he missed kept increasing very significantly. So much so that by his senior year of high school, he had missed an accumulation of a quarter of a year at a college prep high school with lots of AP classes and lots of college prep kinds of things. And looking back, it's easier to see it. We didn't so much at the time, but there was a lot more going on than just somebody with migraines, but that he was very withdrawn, very passive, and passively defiant, that he was doing things that were, from this medical perspective, not going to help the migraines. A lot of video games, a lot of retreat into video games, and an online girlfriend that he spent a lot of his time at night being with. And it'd be like, look, we would get frustrated with him as he would perhaps sleep the day on his recovery meds, but then be up all night with the girlfriend, and we just didn't get that. We definitely would jump in and try to help advocate for him with his school, help him organize how to get all of this homework back in, how to continue on this trajectory of getting into a prestigious biomedical engineering program in college. In retrospect, we can see that maybe these weren't the best choices that we had. Robert was very quiet. We really didn't hear a lot from him. Decisions to kind of break curfews, to stay up, to not eat right, to not engage were very frustrating and angering. And this really broke in pandemia, where he spent his freshman year in pandemic college. It started going okay-ish, but as pandemic shut down dorms, we needed to find him an apartment. And by that second semester, he really, really retreated. And Robert's emotional vocabulary was 3 phrases: I'm fine, I have a headache, I have a stomach ache. And, we didn't realize that that's really a problem, because he had basically curled up in a ball in a bed, and just had stopped. His coping patterns, his way of handling things hadn't changed since high school. What had changed is that mom and dad weren't there to get him through this. And so we found him in April of that freshman year, pretty pretty impoverished. He had spent the semester in bed. He hadn't been telling us really the truth about what had been going on. He was pretty thin. He wasn't sleeping right. I think he was having a lot of panic attacks and pretty welded to his computer and chatting with his girlfriend. And so it took a lot for us to figure out what had been going on. We dutifully rescued him, tried to sign him back up with therapists, more classes. He had flunked out. The costs of the semester were simply lost, but a lot of deception. And so, he wasn't fine. He wasn't going to a therapist. He wasn't eating. He wasn't taking his meds. He wasn't going to school. And when we finally would confront him and say, look, I want to see some grades. How you're telling me you're getting A's. I'd like to see that. I think that's when it broke apart. He said he was suicidal. And that's when it really came crashing down that he needed some intense treatment. He told the local day program that our insurance would cover that everything was fine, and they thought he was great and encouraged him to just buy plane tickets and go out and find his girlfriend. And that's when we knew that, this guy who was basically not getting out of bed, not really going to a day program, not going to school, and not getting a job, that we were really, really stuck. We were frustrated and angry and really confused. And that's how we started 2.5 years of institutionalized psychiatric care.
Well, and as you're talking about this too, it makes me think specifically about the questions of how that we have a sense, right, of how it was impacting you and also
Sure.
how it was impacting your son. But if you could just take a moment to kind of describe some of those feelings that you felt as it was kind of coming to a head, like you said, we're at this place where we're really stuck and we need support.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was very confusing. As parents, look, mommy's very accomplished in her field. I certainly do my thing. We solve problems. We were very happy to help solve his problems and in times, unfortunately, solve them for him. So we would vacillate between confusion, concern, anger, frustration. We really didn't understand at all what was going on or why he felt the need to keep lying to us and repeat behaviors that we just didn't understand, that seemed to be making it worse for him, and withdraw further and further away from our family, which felt very hurtful.
Mm. What was your biggest fear during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point, right before we started considering care, was really concerned that he was going to kill himself. He had an apartment that had kind of a balcony that it had a door to a non-existent balcony that the door opened. So he was on a high rise, and you could open a door on a glass wall that had kind of a bar at hip level.
Wow.
And that was just I'm really concerned that as he's painted himself in a corner with his lies, and at this point we were beginning to suspect that it was too good to be true, but getting caught in that would his shame and his depressed mood and anxiety, would he rush to an easy solution? And it was we've got to go get him right now. And I remember trying to convince him to come home while mommy was driving.
Wow.
And so that was really scary, but I can also caution that in this process, I don't think fear is necessarily the only tough feeling or hard feeling, that there's been moments of great humility and also kind of grief and mourning that we have, Robert doing. He's at this point, he lives on his own, he's working full time, he's doing, but the cost of this was really our family, the loss of his relationship to his younger sister. I wouldn't consider any of this particularly traumatic. We're very lucky, but maybe his younger sister would consider it traumatic, and their relationship is pretty buried right now. And that grief is another tough, hard emotion. Fear's not the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right, follow-up question. You started by just saying, too, hey, this was, here's where Robert is now, and this journey was started 2.5 years ago. So if you feel comfortable, kind of fill in the gaps of where was it, as, like you said, as you're literally in the car driving to get him because you are worried for his life. What was kind of that treatment journey for him that got him to where he is now? Yeah,
it was really unclear. It was very confusing because we really didn't know what options there were. We were happy to have an outpatient therapist that we tried to get them, and he would tell him everything was fine, and he's incredibly convincing. We tried a local day program that insurance covered. They never asked us how he was doing. He would say he was fine. He was not getting out of bed. That's not fine. And they were kind of offended that we suggested that they were wrong. And it really, my wife was overwhelmed. And the real road beginning success was that her therapist said, I've heard about kids like this. You might want to consider something called wilderness therapy. And that was really the beginning of getting things going. Robert really didn't fit a diagnosis. I guess it was kind of depression, but it was really hard to figure out. And it really wasn't until there was a couple of books that really helped. And the one that helped the most was this book called An Unchanged Mind by McKinnon. And it describes kids of not necessarily in one diagnosis, but just being immature. I was like, yeah, that's my kid. I mean, that really was the moment where a light went off. And then I read another book about wilderness. And it was like, I think this is more of what the situation is. So we went to Open Sky, which was a wilderness program that recently closed from low enrollment. We did we had an education consultant that we really, really benefited from. We thought we got gains at Open Sky. We tried an aftercare institutional program that fell flat on its face. We went back to Open Sky. We tried him living on his own, which was a disaster. And then finally, we found Cornerstones of Maine, an institutional program on the East Coast, and that was the biggest sustained success. And so that is 2.5 years, and probably I'm just going to ballpark $250,000. Yeah.
It's expensive.
It's really expensive. And, I think I've met people. We went all in every session. I met people who were surprised that what they were in the moment wasn't it, right? Like we were very lucky that our consultant at least gave us the heads up of there's a distance to this. This is not a sprint. And I still find a few people in the aftermath of all of this who I think are like, I'm not so sure you quite understand where we're at in the world right now with the progress or the appearance of where their child is showing up.
Well, and especially when they're recommended a wilderness program or something like that, right? Sometimes parents think, okay, this is the ticket. This is going to help. And oftentimes that's the space where you literally have the space to have insight, to then acquire the tools, but it's the applying the tools integrated back into society. But that's where the continuum comes in, and it comes at a cost.
Yeah, and I remember my very first meeting with our educational consultants, and they described what goals and steps wilderness would bring and what an aftercare program would look like. And I thought, I think he really needs that aftercare program. And they're like, but most kids need the wilderness first. And it's like, right, these are stages. And I think it's important to think of things in stages, progress, or changes, and that not all change is going to be feasible in any one experience.
Yeah. Well, and you I want to get back to that because I think change, I'm going to pause on kind of piggybacking on that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one quick question as a filler, and then we're going to circle back, because when you're talking about change or phases, we're oftentimes, I think that ties into the idea of success or the vision of what
Yeah.
success looks like. And so I do want to ask that question as it has evolved for you as a parent, looking at what success looks like for your child. But you just talked about working with a consultant. I want to ask quickly, too, if there were any other types of resources that you specifically leaned on or had access to. I know you said the 2 books. Is there anything else that you also had, connected with or heard about in your own treatment journey, too, as a parent?
Open Sky had some parenting sessions that I thought were extremely helpful. They tried to cram a lot into one weekend. I wound up fender bending. It was too much. I hit the rear-ended somebody. And then honestly, my father he grew up in between a combat war veteran and a brother with bipolar. And so he had a different generation's perspective, but very accurate. And so I'm not an internet guy. I've listened to all but I think one podcast in my life, only because the guy begged me to. So really books, my father, our consultant, our therapists, my wife and I did well. I think the only other book I really got something from was something called The Inner Game of Tennis. And I don't play tennis, and that book I think very much describes the process of being a parent.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to include all of these because the other 2 books that you listed, I think it would be beneficial for folks to also tag into, in case they are at this place, kind of where you have already been through. But okay, back to the question about success. Right. So what has replaced success for you in your relationship with your son? Yeah,
and I think the challenge is that I think focusing on success and achievement is part of how we got there. And that success for the sake of success and achievement is not, there's a lot of vibrancy to life beyond looking at successes and achievements. And so I think connection with my son, he's an adult. He goes and does his own thing. Now, you could say so is that successful? Well, he didn't go to college, but he's got a job. Is that a success? Is that an achievement? Or is it just that he's finally developing autonomy? And so, I guess we could get to the extent that anything could be measured as a success. But I think finding his own voice has been the most important part of this maturation. And I think that that's ultimately what I would suggest is more important than a success. I don't hear from him a lot. He just does his own thing. And like I said, a consequence of all of these years is that I've lost that kind of close family that we had when they were really young. But I still have a connection with them. I heard from him Tuesday, and that meant a lot. And I think I'm going to go see him for his birthday in a month. So I think intimacy, connection, his autonomy, his voice, those are a lot more important things than success.
I completely agree. Okay, and if you could give, final question, some type of imparting advice or suggestions or encouragement to a parent who is either going through this or about to go through this. They're kind of at, envisioning where you were with Robert, kind of when everything came to a head. What advice would you share with a parent right now?
Yeah, I think certainly you better go all in. And that might be an easy thing to say, in a dramatic way. Oh, I'll do anything. But I think as you have a moment to ponder that, well, what are the things that you're not willing to do? What are the things that you won't do to help your kid? And I think when you mentioned, well, what's the scariest thing? And certainly self-harm is terrifying, but the real moments, the tough moments are when you say, look, I'm doing all the work and you're doing nothing. And part of this immaturity means I'm going to stop doing. We're stuck, and I've been paying for that apartment, I've been paying those bills. I'm going to stop. And I think the tough question for parents to consider is, can you say that and truly mean that? Are you ready to mean that? And it's not a bluff. My love is not a negotiation tool.
I love that. That feels like the perfect ending to this like really vulnerable interview. And I can't express my gratitude and appreciation enough for you taking the time to share in less than 30 minutes the culmination of your own personal journey that started 2.5 years ago. So thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guests for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at joanna@successissubjective.org. Be sure to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you are listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener-supported, made possible by our team and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.